This is going to be my big, long, unscripted ramble about the Disney trilogy of Star Wars. The um the Disney trilogy of Star Wars, where do we even begin? Well, I guess with Force Awakens. It's a good, solid premise of a movie. It sets things up, it introduces characters, and it's pretty good. Um yeah, the First Order is a pretty good antagonist. It makes sense in universe and out of universe because think about it. Um, when Star Wars was originally made, the Empire was an allegory for Nazi Germany. Um, and also just fascism in general. So, because that was a fear at the time. Now, cut to when the Force Awakens comes out. What's uh what's the fear now? Well, it's neo Nazis. So what do we get? Um we get the First Order, who are trying to do what the Empire did, but bigger and better and more everything. Just like how neo Nazis are with Nazis. It makes sense that the First Order would want to build another Death Star because that's what the Empire did. Except it also makes sense that the First Order would want to do it better. So they make it a planet and they make it shoot the lasers through hyperspace and it uses a star as fuel. That makes sense. It also makes sense that um that the stand-in for Vader is an emotional teen because what the fuck are most neo-Nazis but whiny, angry, piss baby emotional teens? Now, by the way, this all comes from a perspective. I've only seen each movie once in theater, with the exception of Rise of Skywalker, which I saw on Disney Plus once. Although I wasn't paying a super amount of attention, I was basically just watching it with my friend because I said I would. Um, make sure they were safe because they have photosensitivity, they have seizures and stuff. So wasn't really paying much attention on my second watch through. Now, The Force Awakens, again, sets everything up pretty nicely. It's not the best movie ever made. It's not the worst Star Wars movie ever made at this point either. At this point in the timeline, when that movie came out, the worst Star Wars movie was Attack of the Clones. An argument could be made that Star Wars The Clone Wars, the movie, is worse than Attack of the Clones, but that's shaky. On my list, it's better, but opinions, you know how they be. So then the problem starts. The Last Jedi comes out. And this is when the problems start. Ryan Johnson actively took every single thing that was set up by The Force Awakens and throws it out. And he does this intentionally to try and subvert your expectations, which not exactly a good thing. Like, if done well, it could be good. If done poorly, it can be that. And this is also where we see the other problem of they're not being a unified direction in where the trilogy is going. We get the first movie, we get it set up, and then the next guy comes in for the second movie and he has completely different ideas. This is a problem. Now, on its own, The Last Jedi is a fairly decent movie. It's a pretty good movie. The issue comes in it's not a very good sequel to Force Awakens. That's the issue. That's the main problem here. It alters the trajectory of everybody's character arc. And it just kind of fucks stuff up. And that's really all I have to say on The Last Jedi. That's where the cracks really start to show in this trilogy. It's not the worst thing ever made, like I thought when it was first came out. The Last Jedi is a pretty decent movie. Like, I'm even at this point, I'm over Luke's characterization. Like, as much as I love Legends Luke, he's pretty much the definition of a Gary Sue in Legends. Legends Luke is just perfect. He figures out how to use light side force lightning. He fights Aboleth and survives. Like, Legends Luke is too powerful. He's too perfect. He never makes any mistakes until that one point where, oh yeah, one of his apprentices, who is also Han and Leia's son, fucking goes to the dark side, and he goes into exile because of it. Did we all forget that Luke literally does the exact same thing? This perfect Grandmaster Luke that we get in Legends does the exact fucking same thing that he does in the movie? Because I forgot that. I forgot that until this very moment. So, yeah. Now, then, so after we get Last Jedi, the writers of The Rise of Skywalker basically had two options at this point. They can either course correct and go and basically say, nah, none of that mattered in the last movie. We're doing what the first movie did set up. Or they could just roll with what the Last Jedi set up and go, okay, so the first movie set up this thing, the second movie said, nah, none of that matters. Here's where we're going, and we're gonna roll with that. Those are the two options that make sense. The writers of The Last Jedi, or not Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, decided we're going to do neither of those things. We're going to take the trilogy in another direction again. And once again, they altered the course of character arcs. They altered personalities ever so slightly to make them suit this new narrative. They gave the one guy a pretty racist backstory, and it didn't work. And once again, taken on its own, out of the context of the rest of the trilogy, Rise of Skywalker is a fairly solid movie. So we have an issue with three separate, on their own, pretty solid movies, all forming one story, but the three of them seem to hate each other. Anyone see a problem with that? This is the biggest problem with the sequel trilogy, is there's no unified vision. It's just one writer handing the reins off to another writer, handing the reins off to another writer, and they all seem to hate each other. So where do we go from here? What? Okay, let's look at the actual story that's going on. The actual story, underneath all of this course correction and refocusing of character arcs, the story underneath all that bullshit, once you strip it away, the story itself is a pretty good story and it makes sense, which is surprising. Very surprising considering how these movies were written. There's greatness lying just beneath the surface. But corporate safety and refusing to have a unified vision prevented that story from happening properly. Now, let's touch on individuals' characters. We're going to start with Rey, because where else do we start? Rey's not a Mary Sue, by definition. A Mary Sue is a female character who is the most powerful. Everybody likes her. She doesn't make any mistakes. In the story of the sequels, Rey is not the most powerful. Not everybody likes her. And she does make mistakes. What Rey is poorly written due to the same lack of unified vision. Her character arc is surprisingly consistent, despite everything. But it's fairly flat. It doesn't really go anywhere. It starts with like a little peak right at the beginning in Force Awakens, and then throughout Last Jedi and throughout Rise of Skywalker, it just kind of went until right at the end of the Rise of Skywalker where it went again. So that's the issue with Rey, is she's a flat character. She doesn't really develop all that much because of the way the movies were written. It never really gave her an opportunity to. And unlike a lot of very not valid criticisms of Rey, you can't say the same thing about Luke and Anakin. Luke had a very standard hero's journey character arc. Anakin had his rise and fall character arc. Rey, once she got off Jakku, and she didn't really develop from there. She got her training, but her personality didn't shift. She didn't really do a lot that was. And the fact we never really see her struggle is another problem. And that's what leads a lot of people to call her a Mary Sue, is we never see her struggle, her training. We never really see her struggle with that. And is that an issue? I don't know. Um Again, we don't really see Luke struggle except for that one time in the cave. We don't see, well, we do see Anakin struggle. I guess that's the entire point of his character arc. But we don't see him struggle in becoming powerful. We see him struggle with other unrelated issues. So yeah. Also, side note, Rey did know how to pilot things. She even has a line in The Force Awakens about how she like would fly starfighters around the port for whatever the fuck his name is. Um she knows how to fly. Whether she has an extreme amount of experience with flying, I don't know. She has enough experience to fly, and we know Force sensitives can let the Force flow through them without even realizing. That's how Anakin fucking pod raced in episode 1. He let the Force flow through him without realizing he was doing it. He just thought he had really good reflexes and intuition. Rey probably thought the same thing the first time she fucking flew to Falcon through the wreck of the Star Destroyer. And then when she meets Han, she has a knowledge of the ship that Han doesn't, because Han hasn't seen the ship in a fucking while, and it's had modifications made to it that he's unaware of that she is. That makes sense. It makes perfect sense. But then you place it in the context of the other two movies, and it looks, without looking at these small little lines of dialogue that a lot of people seem to have missed, it looks like she just has knowledge she shouldn't. Rey actually makes more sense for her having the knowledge that she does than Anakin does, and is just a little bit, makes a little bit more sense than Luke, because yeah, Luke had experience flying the T-16, which has the same cockpit layout as the X-wing, and that's how he could fly the X-wing. But where do we learn that? In a book. Where do we learn that Rey's previously flown starships around the port and has previously flown the Falcon itself around the port? The actual movie. And here's where we get into my criticism. So basically, none of what we need to know in The Force Awakens is explained to us through other means. Everything we need to know about The Force Awakens, about its plot and story, is explained to us in the movie, or in the previous Star Wars movies. The same cannot be said for The Last Jedi, and for a much, much greater extent, Rise of Skywalker. In order to understand the story of Rise of Skywalker completely, you have to have knowledge of a lore for a fucking Fortnite crossover. The Sith fleet, like all of those Star Destroyers, were built by a cult of Sith worshippers that the Sith have ruled in like this secret little section of the unknown regions for centuries, and not a single little drip of that is explained to us in the actual movie. It's like barely implied. For all we know from the context of the movie, this could have been a thing that Palpatine set up after his defeat at Endor. For all we know, this could be a thing that was originally created by the Jedi. Not the Jedi, the Jedi. Could have been created by them. We don't know that in the context of the movie. It's outside sources that explain that to us, and that's a problem. I should not have to do required reading to understand the plot of a movie. That's the opposite of how it works. All right, let me show you something. In the old extended universe, right? None of the extended universe books were required reading to understand anything that was happening in the movies, mostly because the extended universe didn't exist yet. But even when the Clone Wars came out and they showed the Twi'lek's homeworld, I'm forgetting its name, but it to a T matched the description that it had in these books. That, like, we didn't need to read the books to know that that was the Twi'lek's homeworld or something in the Clone Wars, because we were told that in the Clone Wars, right? So the way it's supposed to work is the extra movie material is supposed to rely on your knowledge of the movies You're supposed to have watched the movies and potentially the TV shows to understand these books, not the other way around. And that's what happened uh, to an extent with The Last Jedi and a massive extent with Rise of Skywalker. That's a problem. Secondly, Disney are constantly retconning their own movie to try and make more sense. And the issue is, why didn't it make sense in the first place? How the fuck did that get greenlit? Why were you rewriting the script as you were filming? Why? Next trilogy. Whatever the next trilogy is. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it follows on the adventures of Rey. I don't care if it's a Knights of the Old Republic adaptation. I don't care if it's fucking 3 words written in shit on a bathroom wall. As long as it's unified and all of the context of it is explained in either the movies, that trilogy, or one of the trilogies that already exist. Because if you're watching a movie and the casual fan is wondering, what the fuck? I am completely lost, you failed. If you're watching a movie and someone like me who consumes Star Wars content religiously is sitting there wondering, what the fuck is going on, you have failed. It's it's just, what went wrong? Why? Why did they decide to do it like this? Why did they decide to write one episode, gauge fan reactions, let some guy with his own vision completely change the trajectory of everything without any supervision, and then let it happen again for the third movie? How did they let this happen? And why isn't Dave Filoni the overall supervisor of all of Star Wars at this point? Because every single successful Star Wars property since Disney took it over, with the exception of Rogue One, Dave Filoni has been involved in. He created the Clone Wars alongside George Lucas. He created the fan favorite character Ahsoka. He, along with Jon Favreau, made The Mandalorian. Why is he not creative director? And I don't know why. Would the sequel trilogy have been better? I don't know. What I can definitively say is, if he was creative director, is they would have been a lot more cohesive. They would have actually been a 3-act story instead of um instead of 3 separate 3-act stories that seem to be at war with each other. Did you know the about halfway through Rise of Skywalker, there's like a natural resting point, and then the movie stops and then keeps going. And that felt very interesting to me when I watched that for the first time. It almost felt as if they quickly, in the first half of the movie, put in all of the material that Last Jedi should have been, and then only then, halfway through the movie, after that resting point and then starting again, could they actually write the finale. Because the finale they were writing did not make any sense with The Last Jedi as the movie that preceded it. That's an issue. The Last Jedi completely altered the course of the story. They should have either rolled with it or completely or just, I don't know. They should have just rolled with it. But instead they course corrected in such an odd and disjointed way. And then Palpatine is back. Okay, so I guess we're doing Dark Empire, except wait, we're not. Except wait, we are? Except wait, we're not. Because within the context of the movie, it's implied that Palpatine is in his original body. It's implied that his original body is falling apart at the seams, and he's kept alive only by this life support and his pure dark side energy. And at this point, is effectively a lich. That's pretty fucking cool. That's cool and new, and for my knowledge, we haven't seen that in Star Wars before. And then after the movie, they go out and they say, oh, that Palpatine was a clone, and his clones have been degrading, and that's why he was so fucked up. And I'm like, okay, so we're doing Dark Empire then, but worse. So it, and then we have that whole like the collective some knowledge of all of the Sith are in Palpatine, and if Rey struck him down in anger, all of that would be transferred into Rey, and she'd be corrupted by this mass force of darkness. And I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. That's a neat concept. That explains why it took so long for the Sith to have their plan come along and actually do stuff. It's not because none of them were smart enough until Palpatine to do it. It's just they didn't have the collective some knowledge to be able to be that good of a puppet weaver until Palpatine took the knowledge, and that last extra mind added to the sum pool did the thing. But then you have, but then no, it's implied that Palpatine himself would have taken over Rey's body. And not just it would have been Rey corrupted to the dark side with the some knowledge of all Sith, which is what the movie implied. But then later they tell us that it's the first thing, where it's Palpatine takes over her body, which, like, what the fuck? So does that mean Palpatine is Darth Bane? Technically? Or what does that mean? It doesn't make sense. And right at the end of the movie, they introduced the concept of a dyad in the Force, which, that's pretty neat. They set up it. Rian Johnson in Last Jedi sets up that Rey and Kylo have this unique connection, and it's not explained. It's not touched on. It's not explained at all until the very end of Rise of Skywalker, when Palpatine is just like a dyad in the Force, and then it's just dropped. No explanation, no nothing. And the explanation we have to get is from like writers over Twitter. What's a dyad in the Force? That could have been explored. That could have been some information that if this was written in a unified effort, would have been at the end of Last Jedi, and would have been explored throughout the course of Rise of Skywalker. But it wasn't. And I don't know. There's a good story under there, but there's so many weird writing decisions. And I guess I might as well touch upon Rey Skywalker. Disney deciding that a Skywalker is just like a special force thing, like each generation has their Skywalker, and it's a special Force thing, and it's like, okay, so what does that mean? That's not explained at all in the movie. In the context of the movie, it just feels like Rey was just like, I don't like the fact that my last name is Palpatine, so I'm just gonna call myself Skywalker now. That's what it felt like in the movie. In the context of all of this extra information we've gotten from the writers, it's this special Force thing, and Skywalkers are beings that appear whenever change needs to happen in a galaxy or some bullshit. And it's like, that's not explained in the movie at all. It like that's an interesting concept. If it was handled well, it could have been an interesting concept. But it wasn't. It wasn't handled at all. It feels almost as if, to the backlash of Rey proclaiming she was a Skywalker, Disney came up with this explanation after the fact. That's what it feels like. And to everybody saying found family and adoption, we never see we never see Luke, Force Ghost or otherwise, go, hey, I'm gonna adopt you basically as my daughter. Like, we don't see that. We don't see Leia doing that, in which case her name would be Rey Solo, I guess, at that point. Rey Solo Organa, maybe. I don't know. What the fuck was Leia's last name at that point in the story? I don't know. Solo Organa is from Legends. It might be that in the movies. I don't remember if we ever hear it. Um, but in the context of the movie, completely disregarding all exterior sources of information, it really feels like Rey was just like, I don't like the last name Palpatine, so I'm going to call myself Skywalker. That's what it feels like. Also, why wasn't her lightsaber a fucking saber staff? At least they made it orange. Also, Finn was force sensitive. A force sensitive ex stormtrooper. That could have been a really fucking interesting story. Too bad it wasn't explored at all. It's it's just really upsetting that they create all of this potential and then they just throw it away because they don't have a unified vision, and the writers are constantly trying to course correct for each other, when if they just stuck to the original, probably um a